Hello and welcome to Part 2 of the Basics of APA Style, created by Dr. Julia Grace Jester in conjunction with Harrisburg Area Community College's APA Citation Resource Team. Part 2 of the Basics of APA Style is going to cover some of the specific examples of citations, references, and other paper components. For an overview of the purpose of APA Style and how we use it, please see the Basics of APA Style Part 1 video. Let's begin by talking about some of the examples of in-text citations. Now remember, in-text citations are the way in which we give credit to the source in the middle of our writing. This is an example of a sentence where the citation comes at the end. This particular resource has two authors and was published in 2011. Within parentheses, we use an ampersand to separate the authors. We sometimes, however, are citing them within the text of the sentence, so when we mention the names of the authors, we separate them instead by the word and put only the date in parentheses afterwards. So this is an example of an in-text citation where we're including the author's names within the context of the sentence. Now, this is what we use when we're summarizing information from these resources, but sometimes we actually quote the exact wording from the resources. Be careful when you're writing not to overquote. Most of the time it's better to summarize, but there are certain times where you need to use the exact wording, either because they said it best or because there's some very specific information in what they said. Quotations are very similar to citations in APA Style, except they have quotation marks and page numbers. Here's an example of an in-text citation for a quote. Notice how the author and year go directly at the end of the quote after the quotation marks before the period, and we've added in the page number within the parentheses. In APA, we use the abbreviation P period for a page number. Again, sometimes we will actually mention the author within the sentence, and in this case, the year always goes with the author's name or names, but the page number always has to go at the end of the quote. So you'll see here how that citation has been broken down into two components. Just remember, page numbers always go at the end of quotes, but year always goes with the author. Now, in-text citations are only half of what we use to give credit to resources. An in-text citation alone doesn't give us enough information to know what the source is. We also have to have references at the end, and different reference materials have different formats. Let's zoom in a little bit to look at these a little bit closer. You'll notice that there are three different examples here, which don't cover all the different types of resources. These are just some examples. A book is referenced differently from a journal article, and different types of books are referenced slightly differently. The first example is a book with a single edition. The second example is for a book with multiple editions, as most textbooks are. Notice that there are some similarities, but we need to know the edition when a book has multiple editions. Often, there's differences between one edition and the next, in terms of things such as page numbers and content of it. If nothing changed, there'd be no point for a new edition. We've got different information for a journal article because journals are periodicals that are released several times a year. We need to know not just what the journal is it comes from, but what volume and issue of that journal. For information about the individual components of these, please see the different resources at the HAC website. In writing papers in APA, we don't just use references and citations. We also organize the paper into different components. References go on a reference page, which is a separate page at the end of whatever it is you're writing. This is used for term papers, research papers, articles, book chapters, etc. Please do speak with your own teachers to see whether or not they want a separate reference page or merely want the references at the end of what you're writing. The reference page starts with the word references in bold and centered at the top of its own page at the end of the document. The heading references does not get any additional punctuation around it. The reference page, like the rest of a paper in APA, is double-spaced without any additional spaces added in between. The references are in alphabetical order by the first author name, and that first author is based upon the author order within the resource itself. Don't rearrange the author order within a resource. So for instance, if something is written by Smith and Brown, don't rearrange it to Brown and Smith, because order of the authors is relevant to who receives how much credit for the intellectual property that they've created in their writing. Each reference is left aligned on the first line and indented on each additional line of that reference. This is called a hanging indent and is easily done in most word processing programs. The reference page has no bullets, no numbering, and no underlining. Under the current form of APA style papers have other components as well. Most of them start with a title page. The title page gives the basic information of this resource. It tells us who wrote it, where they're coming from, and the title of it. The current edition of APA separates out what a professional title page should contain in comparison to a student title page. The professional version includes a running head. The running head is in the header. The running head is a briefer version of the title that will appear at the top of every page within this particular paper. The professional version then includes the title in bold a few lines down from the running head. 2 lines down from that is the authors and author affiliation. For some professional papers, there will be an author's note at the bottom. For the student version of the title page, the header only contains the page number with no running head. The title format is the same, but after the author's name comes the school, class, and date information. Student papers do not include an author's note on them. Some teachers may want you to use the professional format, whereas others may prefer the student format. Please see your individual teacher for which format you need to use. APA style papers generally also have an abstract, which is right after the title page. An abstract is roughly a 150 to 250 word summary of the entire paper. It summarizes everything about it, what its main topic is, what results were found, the overall conclusion. It's not a teaser summary. It actually tells all that information so that someone can look at the abstract and decide whether or not they want to look at the paper as a whole. Abstracts generally do not include in-text citations, but if using very specific information from a cited source, they can be included. For professional papers being written for publication, the abstract is followed by keywords. Keywords are not often needed for in-class papers, so please check with your teacher about whether or not that's needed for a particular class. APA-style papers also include headings, which appear in a very specific pattern in terms of formatting and organization. For instance, all headings are in bold. The paper title appears at the top of the first page of writing, the page after the abstract, and is centered. All major headings are also centered. Subheadings within those major sections are left aligned. If a subheading has divided sections too, those are left aligned and in italics. For very complicated papers, there are additional levels, so if you need more than that, please see the APA publication manual. Let's look at 2 example heading outlines, one for a primary research paper and one for a literature review paper. Primary research involves gathering and analyzing new data. These types of papers have a very specific set of major and minor subheadings. Here is an outline view for primary research using human participants. These types of papers almost always have a method section, a results section, and a discussion section, with various subheadings under each depending on the research conducted. Note that the headings capitalize each major word. For a literature review paper, the structure of headings in terms of location and formatting is the same, but there's no specific set headings that all literature reviews use. So the exact heading structure will depend on the organization of that paper. Note that a literature review paper should not include sections labeled method or results, as those are only for research reports. That brings us to the end of Part 2 of the Basics of APA Style. Please see the rest of the APA resources on the HAC Area Community College's library website for more information and for some specific detail on various forms of citations and references.